Why was the boy watching her like that? His eyes, dark and steady, cut through the morning glare as if he knew something she didn't. Maria Rodriguez felt a chill crawl up her spine, even under the harsh Iraqi sun. The market around her was alive with sound, the hum of bartering voices, the rattle of carts, the sharp scent of spices mixing with diesel. Fallujah could be chaotic, but this was different. Something about today felt wrong. She tried to shake the thought. He's just a curious kid, she told herself, adjusting her scarf against the dust. But even as she said it, she couldn't look away. The boy didn't run like the others. He stayed watching. Maria had been in Fallujah for 8 months, working as a translator for the U.S. military. 24 years old, fluent in Arabic, English, and Spanish. She was the bridge between two worlds that rarely trusted each other. Her grandmother used to say, "Every language is a key, Mija. The more keys you hold, the more doors you can open." Maria had believed that. She still did. But lately, every door she opened seemed to lead somewhere darker. Captain Johnson walked beside her, tall, careful, and carrying the weary alertness of a man who'd seen too many ambushes. "Ask Mr. Hassan if he's noticed anything unusual," he said softly, scanning the rooftops. Maria nodded, stepping toward the small electronics stall. The old shopkeeper smiled when he saw her. He trusted her, they all did. She listened to him with the kind of patience soldiers didn't have time for. But today Mr. Hassan's smile faltered halfway through their talk. "Business is slow," he said in Arabic, eyes flicking toward the street. "People are scared again." "Of what?" Maria asked. He hesitated. Whispers, outsiders, men who ask too many questions. Before she could translate, the boy appeared again across the street, this time pretending to browse fruit. Maria's heartbeat quickened. "Captain," she said, her voice tight. "That kid, he's been following us." Johnson didn't look directly. "Eyes forward," he murmured. "We'll handle it." But Maria's instincts, the same instincts that had kept her alive this long, were screaming that something wasn't right. The crowd felt different now. Quieter. Distant. Even the children, who usually swarmed the soldiers for candy, had vanished. They turned down a narrow street, sunlight breaking in slanted beams through hanging wires. Sergeant Williams muttered, "Too quiet." His tone wasn't fear, it was recognition. In Fallujah, silence meant danger. Maria adjusted the strap of her vest, her palms slick with sweat. She thought of her mother back home in Texas, who prayed every night that her daughter's name wouldn't show up on the news. She thought of her grandmother's voice, teaching her Arabic words that now meant survival. Then she heard it, a small metallic click. Her blood froze. "Captain!" The crack of a rifle split the air. The bullet hit the wall inches from Johnson's head, spraying concrete dust into her face. "Sniper!" she shouted. The market exploded into chaos. Screams, gunfire, the smell of smoke. The soldiers dove behind cars as a barrage of bullets rained from multiple directions. Maria hit the ground hard, the heat of the pavement searing through her uniform. Dust filled her lungs as she crawled behind a rusted pickup, her heart hammering. Gunfire echoed from every side. The attackers were positioned high, rooftops, balconies, windows, a perfect kill box. She pressed herself to the ground and tried to breathe through the panic clawing at her chest. Captain Johnson shouted orders, his voice half drowned by the roar of automatic weapons. "We need to move. They're closing in from both sides." Maria looked up, scanning the rooftops. Arabic voices shouted over the gunfire, commands, positions, directions. Her mind switched languages instinctively, pulling meaning from chaos. "There's a leader," she called out. "He's telling them to wait, to pin us down." Captain Johnson's eyes met hers for a brief second, just long enough to register that he heard her, that he trusted her. Then the ground shook. A grenade exploded 20 feet away, sending shrapnel slicing through the air. Maria ducked, feeling hot debris sting her neck. Her ears rang, her vision flickering white. The attackers were trying to flush them out, force them into the open. "This is Team Alpha." Johnson yelled into his radio. "We're under heavy fire, need immediate backup, 2 blocks east of the Central Market." Static, then a distant voice crackled back, almost inaudible through the interference. "Hold position. QRF en route. ETA 15 minutes." 15 minutes. Maria swallowed hard. 15 minutes under this storm might as well be forever. She clutched the pistol at her hip. She had trained to use it in theory. But she wasn't a soldier, not really. She was here to speak, not to shoot. Yet now, surrounded and cornered, words had lost their power. A second explosion hit closer. The truck she hid behind rocked on its wheels. Metal pinged as bullets tore through the doors. She pressed herself flatter against the dirt, praying the steel would hold. Somewhere behind her, Sergeant Williams cursed. "They're surrounding us." "Move to the east building," Johnson barked. 50 yards, go one at a time." Maria's heart seized. 50 yards of open ground under crossfire. No cover, no guarantee, just a chance. Private Martinez went first. He sprinted in a zigzag, rifle clutched tight. The team laid down covering fire. Bullets chased him, snapping through the air. He dove behind a barrier halfway across, shouting he was hit but alive. Then Sergeant Williams ran, his larger frame making him an easy target. Dust erupted around his boots as rounds slammed into the street. He made it, barely, diving through the doorway of the building. Then it was Maria's turn. Her hands shook. The pistol felt heavy, alien. Johnson's hand gripped her shoulder. "You can do this. Keep low, keep moving, don't stop." She nodded, but inside fear was suffocating her. "You're not a soldier," her mind whispered. "You don't belong here." But then another voice, her grandmother's again, calm, steady. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Mija. It's doing what needs to be done anyway." Maria took a breath, then she ran. The world shrank to noise and motion. Gunfire cracked in bursts. Dust exploded at her feet. Every step felt endless. She was halfway when something hit her leg, a searing, burning punch. She stumbled, bit her lip, and kept going. 20 yards, then another impact her side. She almost fell. Pain ripped through her ribs, sharp and white-hot. Still she ran. Almost there, someone yelled. 10 yards, 5. Another hit her arm this time. She barely registered it. Her body was no longer hers. It was a vessel of pain and willpower. She reached the wall, slammed against it, and collapsed. The world tilted sideways. Voices blurred. Captain Johnson's face appeared above her, shouting something she couldn't hear. Her blood was pooling fast. She looked down, torn fabric, dark stains spreading. She'd lost count of how many times she'd been hit. "Stay with me, Rodriguez," Johnson shouted. His voice sounded far away, underwater. Gunfire still thundered, closer now. Sergeant Williams was yelling that the enemy was massing. 15, maybe more. They wouldn't last long. Maria tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. "Radio, call them, blue building with the broken tank." She could hear her own voice fatting. She wasn't sure he even heard her. Then a sound like thunder. Helicopters, low and fast. The cavalry was coming. She smiled weakly, though she couldn't feel her face. She thought about Texas, about sunlight on the fields, her grandmother baking bread. She thought about her mother's voice. "Come home safe, Maria. Promise me." And then darkness. The next thing she saw was sky spinning, blinding. Soldiers in black gear dropped from ropes, their movements precise and silent. Special operations, not regular army. Captain Johnson pressed his hands on her wounds, shouting to the new arrivals. "She's hit bad. We need a medic." One of them knelt beside her, calm and composed even in chaos. His name tag read Patterson. "I'm a medic," he said, his voice steady. "Hang on, you're going to be okay." She wanted to believe him, but the pain was fatting too fast. That wasn't good. Fatting meant blood loss. Fatting meant her body was giving up. "How many?" she whispered. Patterson hesitated, his eyes flicking over her torn uniform. 14 that I can count," he said quietly. 14 bullets. The number didn't make sense. 14 was too many, too impossible, and yet she was still here. The firefight dimmed in her ears. The sound of her heartbeat was louder than anything else. Patterson's voice blurred. The helicopter's blades thundered above. Someone shouted, "Lift off," and she felt the world rising beneath her. Inside the chopper, everything became light and motion. Medical equipment hummed. Hands worked around her, cutting, pressing, stitching, injecting. Voices spoke in clipped rhythm. Pulse dropping, increase fluids, hold pressure. Maria tried to open her eyes, and for a moment she saw Patterson's face above her. Calm, focused, human. "Am I going to make it?" she managed to ask. "You're a fighter," he said simply. "Keep fighting." She smiled weakly. The sound of the rotors filled her ears. The pain faded again, not into darkness this time, but into something lighter. She could see the lights of Baghdad below, 1,000 points of gold stretching into forever. She thought, maybe this is what hope looks like. Then everything went quiet. What does a heartbeat sound like when you're not sure it's yours anymore? Somewhere between the roar of rotors and the shriek of sirens, Maria drifted in and out of a world that refused to hold still. The helicopter lurched, and the pain flared bright again, reminding her she was still tethered to life. She could feel the vibration of the engines through the stretcher, could hear the clipped, urgent tones of men trained to sound calm even when everything was falling apart. Pressure dropping. "Stay with us, Maria, hang in there." Someone squeezed her hand. She didn't know who. Maybe the medic, maybe a ghost of memory. The smell of blood and antiseptic hung heavy in the cabin. The lights inside the helicopter were dim, red for night operations, turning everyone into silhouettes. Patterson's face appeared and disappeared in flashes, his gloved hands moving fast, tapping IV lines, tightening bandages, injecting something cold that burned its way through her veins. She wanted to speak, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. Only air escaped. Every breath rattled in her chest like broken glass. Outside Baghdad was a web of lights, so close, so far. "ETA 12 minutes, the pilot shouted. "She's still with us." Patterson leaned close. "You're doing great, focus on my voice." She blinked once, slow, heavy. Every blink felt like a decision. Each one could be the last. And then she was somewhere else. Her grandmother's kitchen. Flour dusted across the counter, the smell of baking bread, Texas sunlight warming the tiled floor. "The world is wide, Mija," her grandmother used to say, "but God walks with those who walk with courage." The sound faded back into the thunder of engines. "Landing," the pilot called. The jolt of touchdown snapped her awake. The world blurred into chaos, motion, shouting, light. Hands lifted her from the stretcher, the night air biting at her blood-slicked uniform. The rotor wash whipped through her hair as they rushed her toward the roof entrance of the Baghdad Trauma Center. Someone was shouting codes in medical shorthand she couldn't understand. A woman's voice cut through the noise, sharp, commanding. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Get her inside now." Fluorescent lights exploded above her eyes. The ceiling rushed by in streaks. Cold air replaced the heat of battle. For the first time in hours, there was no gunfire, no sand, no smell of smoke, only the sterile scent of medicine and fear. Dr. Mitchell's face hovered over her, focused, determined, eyes steady behind fogged goggles. "Maria, if you can hear me, you're safe. We've got you." Safe, the word didn't feel real. They wheeled her through double doors into an ocean of white light and metallic clatter. Machines beeped, monitors flashed, voices overlapped in practiced urgency. The air felt electric. "Blood type. O positive. BP 80/40, she's crashing. Hang another unit now." Dr. Mitchell didn't look away from her work. "Suction. I need to see that chest wound." Maria wanted to tell her not to bother, that it was fine, that she didn't want to die scared, but her lips wouldn't move. Her world shrank to the rhythmic chirp of a monitor. It sounded far away. "Chest cavity collapsed, prep for thoracotomy." She could feel pressure, hear words like scalpel, retractor, clamp. Then pain again, white, all-consuming. She tried to scream, but the air never reached her throat. Dr. Mitchell's voice cut through everything. "Come on, Maria, not yet, stay with me." Inside her fatting mind, Maria thought she heard her father's voice, soft and worried from 1,000 miles away. "You always run toward the fire, not away from it." And she wanted to tell him, "I didn't mean to." The beeping slowed, then steadied. "She's stabilizing," said Dr. Chen, the anesthesiologist. "BP climbing, good work." The surgery became a rhythm, like a battle fought in silence. Dr. Mitchell and her team moved with controlled precision, each motion deliberate, rehearsed. Blood, suction, clamp, stitch, over and over. The chest wound was the priority. Her left lung had collapsed, ribs fractured, arteries torn but not severed. 1 inch closer and it would have pierced her heart. "She's lucky," one of the nurses murmured. Dr. Mitchell shook her head. "No, she's fighting." Hours bled together. Each wound told its own story. One bullet had entered through her thigh, shattering the femur. Another had torn across her abdomen, missing the liver by a miracle. A third had sliced her arm open from shoulder to elbow, splintering bone and nerve. 14 holes in total, each one a challenge, each one a chance to fail. "Lung reinflated," Dr. Chen announced. "Oxygen levels rising." "Good," said Dr. Mitchell, wiping sweat from her brow. "Let's move to the abdomen." Her gloved hands trembled for just a second before steadying again. The hours of adrenaline were taking their toll, but she refused to slow down. "This girl's still got fight left in her," she murmured. "I can feel it." Somewhere deep inside the fog of anesthesia, Maria heard that and wanted to believe it. Time lost meaning. The surgery became endless. Instruments clinked, monitors beeped, the room hummed with life and tension. The bullet near her kidney proved the most dangerous. Dr. Mitchell's voice lowered to a whisper. "If I nick that artery, we lose her." The room went still except for the hiss of oxygen. Then, "Got it," she said, holding up the twisted fragment between forceps. "Number 14. A collective exhale filled the room. "Vitals holding steady," said Dr. Chen. "She's through the worst of it." Dr. Mitchell allowed herself a small smile. "All right, team, let's close her up." Outside the operating theater, night melted into dawn. The first sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of Baghdad, warm and golden against the cold steel of the trauma center. 8 hours had passed since Maria was pulled from the streets of Fallujah. When Dr. Mitchell finally stepped out of the operating room, her gloves were crimson, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. She stripped off her mask and looked through the observation glass at the young woman on the table, covered in gauze, chest rising in slow, mechanical rhythm. "She's alive," she whispered. "Now it's up to her." Down the hall, Captain Johnson and Sergeant Williams sat slumped in plastic chairs, still in their dusty uniforms. They hadn't spoken much since arriving. The silence between them was the kind that comes only after violence, the silence of what-ifs. When Dr. Mitchell approached, they both stood immediately. "She made it," the doctor said, voice rough from fatigue. "It was close, but she's stable." Johnson exhaled sharply, the first real breath he'd taken in hours. "Thank God." "Can we see her?" "Not yet, she's in recovery, but you can wait here." Williams sank back into his chair, rubbing his eyes. "She saved our lives out there," he said quietly. "Spotted that sniper before we walked into hell. Then she ran through open fire, got hit 14 times and kept moving." Dr. Mitchell paused, letting the weight of those words settle. 14. "Yes, ma'am, 14. The doctor shook her head, disbelief in her eyes. "I've seen soldiers die from one." In the hallway outside the ICU, Father Mackenzie, the chaplain, arrived carrying a small Bible and 2 cups of coffee. "Any word?" he asked softly. "She's stable," said Johnson, "for now." The chaplain nodded. "Then we'll pray she stays that way." Inside the recovery room, Maria's world floated between light and dark. Machines hummed beside her. Every breath was assisted by rhythmical mechanical sighs. The smell of antiseptic replaced the stench of dust and smoke. Somewhere, a monitor kept time for her, beeping her heartbeat into existence. Her dreams came in fragments, faces, voices, memories. The boy at the market. The way Captain Johnson shouted her name. The sound of her mother's laughter on the porch back home. At one point, she thought she saw her grandmother again, sitting by the kitchen window, light falling across her wrinkled hands. "You have the keys, Mija," the old woman said softly. "Now open the door and walk through." Maria reached out, but the vision dissolved into white light. Days blurred into one another. She was aware only in flashes, nurses adjusting IV lines, doctors murmuring updates, someone brushing her hair out of her face. Pain would come, crest, then fade again into medication-softened haze. But her body remembered. Every wound had its own ache, every stitch its own whisper. Sometimes, in the quiet of early morning, she would feel tears slide down her temples without understanding why. On the fourth morning, she opened her eyes fully for the first time. The ceiling above her was white, blindingly so. The hum of machines surrounded her like a mechanical lullaby. When she turned her head, she saw her mother, Carmen Rodriguez, her dark hair tied back, face lined with sleepless worry. "Mija," her mother whispered, "you're awake." Maria tried to answer, but her throat was raw. A nurse appeared instantly, offering ice chips. The cold against her lips felt like salvation. "How long?" she croaked. "4 days since surgery," her mother said, tears spilling freely now. "Your father and brother are here too. They went to get coffee." Maria blinked slowly. 4 days. She tried to move her right arm and winced as pain shot through her shoulder. Tubes, bandages, monitors. Her body was a battlefield map of survival. Dr. Mitchell entered the room with a tired smile. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Maria. How are you feeling?" "Like I lost a fight," she rasped. Then, after a pause, "Or maybe won it." The doctor chuckled softly. "Maybe both." She went through the list of injuries carefully, her tone honest but gentle. The lung had reinflated, the abdominal wounds were healing, but the right arm was uncertain. Nerve damage, swelling, possible loss of movement. "It's too early to know," Dr. Mitchell said, "but you're healing better than anyone expected." Maria listened silently, her gaze fixed on the window where sunlight poured through, painting golden stripes across the sheets. Outside, the city buzzed with life, a world still turning. For a moment, gratitude and disbelief collided inside her. She'd been certain she would die in that street, yet here she was, breathing, broken but alive. Her mother leaned close, whispering, "You came back to us." Maria's eyes filled with tears, not sure how. Her mother squeezed her hand. "Because you're my daughter, and because God's not done with you yet." Outside the room, the hospital corridor was waking up with the day. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere else, a soldier cried. And for the first time since Fallujah, Maria allowed herself to simply listen, to the living, to the breathing, to the world that had waited for her to return. "What do you say to the people who almost lost you?" Maria didn't know. She'd rehearsed a dozen answers in her mind, but none of them made sense once she saw her father's face. Eduardo Rodriguez wasn't a man who cried easily, but when he entered the room, his composure broke with the gentleness of a man who'd held fear too long. His eyes shimmered as he leaned over and kissed his daughter's forehead. "We thought you were gone, Mija," he whispered. Maria tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Her voice came out thin and fragile. "You know me, Papa, I'm stubborn." Her younger brother Carlos hovered awkwardly behind him, coffee in hand, looking smaller than she remembered. 19, quiet and scared in a way only someone who's seen too much news footage of war could be. He tried to meet her gaze but couldn't. His eyes darted to the IV lines, the machines, the white bandages covering half her body. "Hey," she said softly, It's okay, you can look, I'm still me. He nodded, his throat tight. I just didn't think. He stopped, swallowed hard. You got shot 14 times, Maria. Yeah, she said with a ghost of a smile. Lucky number. Her father turned to the window, hiding the way his hand trembled. Her mother, who hadn't stopped praying since the day the call came, reached for her daughter's hand. Carmen Rodriguez's eyes told a story of sleepless nights and unanswered prayers finally heard. When the officers came to our door, she whispered, they said you were critically wounded. They couldn't tell us if you were alive. For 3 days, Maria, her voice cracked. For 3 days we didn't know if our daughter still breathed. Maria blinked back tears, the pain in her chest tightening, not from the wounds but from the guilt. I didn't mean to scare you. Her mother smiled through the tears. That's what daughters do. The hospital felt different with them there. War and loss had built invisible walls around her since Fallujah, but family had a way of breaking through where medicine couldn't. Every word from her mother, every quiet touch from her father, reminded her of what she'd been fighting for all along: life, not victory. Connection, not duty. Later that afternoon, while the others rested, Maria lay watching the light shift across the wall. The rhythmic beep of her heart monitor had become a strange kind of comfort, a sound she'd earned. She thought about Captain Johnson and Sergeant Williams, about the look on their faces when the shooting started, about the boy in the market, the one who watched her, the one who didn't run. Sometimes she wondered if he knew what was coming, if someone had told him, if he was still alive. A knock broke her thoughts. The door opened quietly, and a man stepped inside, tall, clean-shaven, wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself like a soldier who'd forgotten how to stop being one. He held a small bouquet of desert flowers, the kind that somehow grew in places where nothing else dared. Maria Rodriguez, he said, his voice deep, calm, and measured. She nodded. He set the flowers down beside her bed. I'm Commander Jake Morrison. I led the team that pulled you out in Fallujah. For a moment, words failed her. This was the man whose voice had echoed faintly through the chaos, whose team had dropped from the sky like ghosts. She remembered the steady command in his tone, the precision with which his soldiers moved. And now here he was, human, tired, but alive. I didn't expect to see you, she said quietly. I wasn't sure I should come, he replied, but I wanted to see how you were doing. She looked at him, studying his face. His eyes were sharp, but there was softness underneath, the kind of weariness that only comes from carrying too many memories of faces that didn't make it. I don't really remember much, she admitted. Just noise, lights, pain. Morrison nodded. You were hit 14 times and still conscious when we got to you. Most people would have been gone before we even landed. Maria looked down at her hands, her voice small. I didn't feel brave. I just didn't want to die in that street. That's what courage usually looks like, he said. The room fell silent for a moment, the hum of machines filling the space between them. Morrison continued softly. The ambush was planned for weeks. They knew your team's patrol schedule. You warning Captain Johnson about the sniper that saved their lives. If you hadn't spoken up when you did, the first volley would have killed every one of them. Maria stared at the wall, trying to process it. In her mind, she'd only been surviving. She hadn't thought about what her actions meant for anyone else. So, I did something right, she said finally, almost to herself. You did a lot right, Morrison said. We don't often get to thank people like you. Translators are easy to overlook until the moment everything depends on them. She smiled faintly. I wasn't exactly heroic. He leaned closer. You ran 50 yards through open fire. After the first 3 bullets hit you, you kept moving. You didn't give up. That's heroism by any definition I've ever used. Something in his tone, quiet, sincere, struck her harder than she expected. She felt tears prick her eyes and quickly looked away. I didn't even know if I'd make it. That's the thing about moments like that, he said. You never do. You just decide to keep moving anyway. For the first time since the attack, Maria felt something other than fear. Not pride exactly, something quieter. Recognition. A flicker of meaning inside the chaos. Morrison rose from his chair. "I won't take up more of your time. The doctors said rest is critical." "Wait," Maria said before he reached the door. How did it end? In Fallujah." He paused. "We cleared the area. 22 insurgents confirmed. Your team made it out with minor injuries. The boy you mentioned, the one watching you, we never found him." Her heart sank a little. Maybe that's for the best. He nodded once. Maybe it is. As he left, he hesitated at the doorway. "You've got more strength than you realize, Rodriguez. Don't waste it." After he was gone, the room felt quieter, emptier somehow. Maria stared at the flowers he'd left, small, fragile, defiant. The kind of beauty that bloomed even in ruined soil. That night her family insisted on staying with her. Her mother read softly from a small prayer book. Her father fell asleep in the chair by the window. Carlos, earbuds in, pretended not to watch his sister breathe. At one point, Maria opened her eyes and whispered, "Mama." Her mother looked up instantly. "Yes, Mija." "When the soldiers came to the house, what did you think?" Her mother's eyes shimmered. "I thought God was testing me. I thought maybe I had been foolish to let you go so far away. But then I realized you went because you wanted to help people. That's not foolish. That's faith." Maria's throat tightened. "Were you angry?" Carmen shook her head. "No, just scared I'd never get the chance to tell you how proud I am." Maria squeezed her hand gently. "You just did." As night settled over the hospital, Maria lay awake, listening to the rhythmic hiss of oxygen and the faint hum of Baghdad beyond the window. The city glowed, alive, restless, unbroken. She wondered if she'd ever walk its streets again, if she'd ever feel the heat of the marketplace sun without flinching at every sound. The next morning, Dr. Mitchell arrived early, checking her vitals and adjusting her medication. Pain level. "Manageable," Maria said, though the ache in her chest disagreed. "Good," the doctor replied. "You're healing well, but you'll need time. This isn't just about stitches and bones. What you went through, it leaves marks we can't see." Maria nodded slowly. "I keep hearing the shots. Sometimes I wake up and think I'm still there." Dr. Mitchell's expression softened. "That's normal. Your brain is trying to make sense of what happened. It takes time, but you're already doing better than most." "Better," Maria echoed. "I can't even move my arm properly." The doctor smiled faintly. "You're alive, that's the first step. Everything else comes after." When she left, Maria turned her gaze to the sunlight spilling across the blanket. She could feel it faint, but real, the warmth of morning against the cold echo of memory. And somewhere deep inside, she realized something that both comforted and terrified her. She had survived. But survival wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. In the quiet that followed, she let the thought settle like dust after a storm. The pain in her body was still there, but now it had purpose, proof that she'd fought, endured, and somehow, impossibly, lived. Outside her room, the world went on, doctors rushing between wards, families waiting in silence, soldiers limping through the halls of the trauma wing. Life continued, indifferent and miraculous all at once. Maria watched the light fade slowly from gold to pale silver and whispered into the stillness, "I'm still here." For the first time, the words didn't sound like disbelief. They sounded like a promise. Why did she survive when so many did? The question came late at night, when the ward was quiet, when the machines whispered softly in the dark. It was always night when the thoughts came, when the painkillers faded just enough for her mind to wander where her body couldn't follow. The hospital had its own rhythm, footsteps echoing down tiled hallways, the distant squeak of wheels, the muted hum of air vents. It felt like a different kind of battlefield, one fought in silence, in patience, in inches instead of miles. Maria stared at the ceiling, tracing the shadows that played across the plaster. Her body ached, stitched together with more metal and scar tissue than she could count. But it wasn't the physical pain that kept her awake. It was the noise inside her mind, the gunfire that never stopped, the sound of that boy in the market who never ran, the faces of men shouting in Arabic before the street turned to fire. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back there, the air thick with dust, the heat pressing down like a weight, the sharp taste of iron in her mouth. She'd been told that her survival was miraculous. 14 bullet wounds and she lived. But miraculous wasn't how it felt. It felt heavy, like a debt she couldn't repay. Her mother slept in the chair by her bed, her father on a cot in the corner, both refusing to leave. She listened to their breathing, steady, comforting, and tried to match it. But her own breath felt foreign, mechanical, as if it belonged to someone else. When dawn came, Dr. Mitchell returned, her scrubs wrinkled, eyes ringed with fatigue. She carried 2 coffees and that quiet determination that Maria had come to recognize, the kind of steadiness only people in the business of saving lives could afford to have. "You didn't sleep again," the doctor said, glancing at the dark circles beneath Maria's eyes. Maria tried to smile. "The walls make too much noise." Dr. Mitchell pulled up a chair beside her bed. "It's not the walls, is it?" Maria hesitated. "No, it's Fallujah." The doctor nodded. "You're reliving it, that's normal. Your body's healing faster than your mind can process. It's catching up in dreams." "Dreams," Maria's voice was small, "feels more like punishment." "Survivor's guilt," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "It's common. You're asking yourself why you lived when others didn't, why it had to be you." Maria stared at her hands. They were pale now, fragile, covered in faint bruises where IV lines had been. "Because it doesn't make sense. I wasn't trained for combat. I was supposed to talk, not fight. They should have made it, not me." The doctor's tone softened. "You did what soldiers do, Maria. You acted. You survived. That doesn't need to make sense, it just needs to be accepted." Maria looked away. "Acceptance feels like giving up." "No," Dr. Mitchell said. "Acceptance is the first step toward peace." For a long time, neither spoke. The hospital outside buzzed with its quiet chaos, nurses calling out numbers, gurneys wheeling past, radios crackling. Finally, Maria broke the silence. "Do you ever get used to it? The ones who make it and the ones who don't?" Dr. Mitchell's eyes softened. "No, but you learn to honor both. The living by helping them heal, the dead by remembering them without letting the memory destroy you." Maria turned her gaze to the window. The Baghdad skyline shimmered under the morning sun. Life outside kept moving, relentless and indifferent. "I don't even remember the last thing I said before it happened," she whispered. "One second we were talking to a shopkeeper, the next, everything was gone. I keep thinking maybe if I'd said something different, noticed sooner, warned them earlier." "Stop," Dr. Mitchell said gently. "You can't rewrite what's already survived you." The words hit her harder than any medicine. That afternoon, her mother insisted she eat something solid for the first time since waking. The hospital food was bland, but Carmen brought a small tin of cookies she'd packed from home, sweet, soft, a little crushed from travel. Maria took one, the smell of sugar and butter bringing back memories of her grandmother's kitchen. For a moment, the hospital walls disappeared, replaced by sunlight and laughter. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice again. "You're stronger than you think, Mija. Just don't forget why you're strong." The bite brought tears to her eyes. Her mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You'll heal," she whispered. "Not just your body, your heart too." Maria wanted to believe her, but that night the dreams returned. She was running again, the streets of Fallujah twisting endlessly, the sound of gunfire chasing her, bullets tearing through walls. Every time she turned, she saw Captain Johnson falling, Sergeant Williams shouting for cover, the boy's eyes watching from the crowd. Only this time no one came. No helicopters, no rescue, just silence. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat, the monitor beside her screaming with alarm. Nurses rushed in, adjusting tubes, checking vitals. "I'm fine," she insisted between breaths. "Just a dream." But the nurse's eyes told her what she already knew. Dreams like that left scars deeper than bullets. When morning came, Dr. Mitchell stopped by again. She didn't ask about the dream. She didn't need to. Instead, she handed Maria a small card. "I want you to meet someone when you're ready. Her name's Dr. Rebecca Shaw. She works with trauma patients, veterans mostly. She'll help you sort through what you can't say out loud yet." Maria traced the edge of the card with her fingers. "You think I'm broken?" Dr. Mitchell smiled faintly. "No, I think you're rebuilding." For the first time in days, Maria laughed, soft, fragile but real. "That sounds painful." The doctor nodded. "It is, but it's worth it." Later, when her family went to get food and the room was finally quiet, Maria picked up the folded flag that Captain Johnson had left the day before. She held it against her chest, feeling the weight of the fabric, the history stitched into every thread. "This flew over our base in Fallujah," he'd told her. "Now it's yours." She hadn't known what to say then. Now, alone, she whispered to it as if the flag could hear her. "I didn't save anyone, I just didn't die." But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Her warning had given the others seconds, seconds that meant lives. She'd been too lost in her own pain to see it before. A nurse entered quietly, checking her IV line. "You're healing fast," she said kindly. "You must have a strong heart." Maria smiled faintly. "It's mostly metal now." The nurse laughed softly and left. That night Maria sat awake again, the hospital lights dimmed to twilight blue. The city outside shimmered in the distance, the faint hum of traffic rising through the window. Somewhere out there, people were living their ordinary lives, drinking tea, haggling over prices, calling their children home from the street. And she was here, alive by chance, by effort, by something she still didn't understand. She thought of Commander Morrison, of the soldiers who had risked everything to pull her from that street, of Patterson, the medic who refused to give up, of Dr. Mitchell, who had spent 8 hours piecing her body back together. Maybe surviving wasn't luck. Maybe it was a chain of people refusing to let her die. She looked at her reflection in the window, pale, scarred, fragile, and whispered to it, "If I owe them my life, then I'd better do something with it." Outside, the faint call to prayer drifted through the night air, haunting and beautiful. It reminded her of the marketplace before the gunfire, voices, laughter, the rhythm of a city that had always been both sacred and scarred. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain this time, but from something deeper. Gratitude, grief, both at once. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, deeply. The machine beside her kept time, steady, patient, unrelenting. For the first time since the firefight, she didn't try to block out the sound. She listened to it. It wasn't noise, it was proof. Proof that the world had not ended. Proof that there was something left to live for. When morning came, the sunlight hit her face through the blinds, warm and golden. She smiled, small, tired, but genuine. For the first time, she didn't ask why she survived. She asked, "What now?" And that single question changed everything. How do you learn to live again, in a body that remembers everything? Maria asked herself that every morning as the nurses helped her sit up, her movements slow, deliberate, as if every joint belonged to someone else. Pain wasn't the enemy anymore, it was the teacher. It reminded her that she was still here, that her body, despite everything, had refused to quit. Physical therapy began 2 weeks after she woke from surgery. The sessions took place in a small rehabilitation room at the end of the hospital corridor, sunlight streaming through high windows, dust motes dancing like quiet witnesses. The smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat, determination, and quiet frustration. Her therapist was a broad-shouldered man with a gentle voice and the kind of patience that couldn't be taught. Sergeant Jake Martinez. he introduced himself on the first day. "But you can just call me Jake. We're not in uniform here." Maria smiled faintly. "Then I guess you can call me Maria. I'm definitely not in shape to salute anyone right now." He grinned. "Fair enough. We'll start slow. The goal isn't to win any medals, it's just to remind your body how to listen again." That sounded simple enough, until she tried to move her right arm. The pain hit instantly, white and blinding like electricity surging through scar tissue. She gasped, her breath catching as the world narrowed to that single, unbearable point. "Easy," Jake said quickly, steadying her shoulder. "Don't fight it, breathe through it." She nodded, teeth clenched. "Feels like someone's driving nails through my bones." "That's the nerves waking up," he said softly. "They're confused, but confusion means connection, and connection means healing." Every movement felt impossible. Every stretch, every attempt to lift, every muscle that trembled against gravity. But with each session, Maria began to find rhythm in the pain, small victories that no one else could see. On the fourth day, she managed to raise her arm halfway without help. It wasn't graceful, but it was hers. She laughed, sharp, breathless, incredulous. Jake smiled. "That's what progress looks like." The sessions were grueling. Sweat beaded along her hairline, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Sometimes she wanted to scream, to quit, to curl back into the safety of her hospital bed. But then she would remember Fallujah, the feeling of crawling across hot asphalt, her legs refusing to stop. And she'd think, "You've already done worse. Keep going." In the evenings, when her family had gone home to rest, another kind of therapy began. Dr. Rebecca Shaw, calm voice, patient eyes, presence like soft gravity. She was the kind of person who spoke little and listened much, the kind of person who made silence feel safe. Their first session began with the simplest question. "What's the first thing you remember after the attack?" Maria stared at the ceiling for a long time. The sound of rotors, and someone saying I was still breathing. I thought it was strange that they had to say it out loud, like they were trying to convince themselves. Dr. Shaw nodded slowly. "You were between worlds then, the living and the almost gone. That kind of memory stays deep." "I keep seeing the boy," Maria admitted quietly. "The one watching me before it happened. He never ran. I don't know if he was part of it or just there." "Does it matter?" Dr. Shaw asked gently. Maria hesitated. "I think it does, because if he was innocent, I can't stop thinking I failed him, and if he was, I can't stop thinking I should have stopped him." "That's survivor's guilt," Dr. Shaw said softly. "It makes you rewrite every moment until you find a version where no one dies. But war doesn't offer perfect choices, Maria. It only offers consequences." The words landed heavy. She looked down at her hands that used to translate, to write, to gesture through laughter. Now they trembled slightly, still healing, still foreign. "I thought my job was to bridge worlds," she whispered, "to bring people together through words. But when it mattered, all I did was bleed." Dr. Shaw leaned forward. "You did more than that. You warned your team. You endured the unendurable. You lived. That's not failure, that's survival. And survival is the foundation of everything that comes next." "What comes next?" The therapist smiled faintly. "That's for you to decide." Over the following weeks, their sessions became a rhythm, 2 chairs by the window, the hum of city life below, Maria's voice slowly finding strength again. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she laughed, sometimes she just sat in silence. But slowly, the weight on her chest began to shift from unbearable to livable. One afternoon, Dr. Shaw said, "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Maria?" Maria shook her head. "A woman learning to live with her ghosts instead of fighting them." The word stayed with her long after the session ended. Her family visited every day, bringing pieces of home, her father's old guitar, her mother's perfume, her brother's bad jokes. Together they filled the sterile room with warmth. But at night, when the lights dimmed, Maria still wrestled with what she couldn't say out loud, the guilt, the fear, the strange loneliness of being called a hero when she still felt broken. One evening, Captain Johnson arrived, his dress uniform crisp, his posture straighter than she'd ever seen. In his hands he carried a folded American flag. "This flew over our base in Fallujah," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "We wanted you to have it, with gratitude from every soldier who made it home because of you." Maria took it carefully, the fabric rough against her palms. "I was just doing my job." Johnson shook his head. "No, Rodriguez, you went beyond that. You saw what we didn't. You moved when most people would have frozen. You earned this." He hesitated, then added, "You're being recommended for the Purple Heart." The words didn't sink in right away. "That's for soldiers," she said softly. "You bled in service to others," Johnson said. "That's what matters." When he left, Maria stared at the folded flag for a long time. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. She didn't feel like a hero. Heroes didn't wake up shaking from dreams, didn't need help walking, didn't cry quietly into their blankets at night. But maybe being a hero wasn't about what you felt. Maybe it was about what you did anyway. Weeks passed. Her steps grew steadier. Her arm moved higher. Her scars, once angry red, began to fade into pale reminders of what she'd survived. One afternoon, as Jake helped her stand for the first time without support, she nearly collapsed halfway up. Pain surged through her side. Her breath hitched, but she gritted her teeth and pushed again. Jake's voice was firm but kind. "You don't have to be perfect, Maria. You just have to keep showing up." She took another step, then another. The room blurred with effort and tears, but she didn't stop until she reached the end of the parallel bars. When she turned, Jake was grinning. "That's it. That's how you win." She laughed through the pain. "Feels more like surviving than winning." He shrugged. "Same thing sometimes." That night, Maria looked at herself in the small mirror by her hospital bed. The reflection staring back wasn't the same woman who'd walked through the markets of Fallujah. Her body was mapped with scars, her eyes older, steadier. But there was something new in her gaze, not fear, not pain. Resolve. For the first time, she whispered the words she'd avoided for weeks. "I'm still here, and I'm not done." She didn't know what the future held: therapy, recovery, maybe even a return to service in some new way. But she knew one thing: she hadn't survived to stay broken. Dr. Shaw's voice echoed in her memory. "Survival isn't the end of the story. It's the start of a new one." And that night, as the Baghdad lights blinked faintly beyond the window, Maria closed her eyes and let herself imagine a future that wasn't defined by gunfire, but by healing. Not the kind of healing that erases scars, the kind that learns to live with them. What does home feel like after war? Maria asked herself that as the wheels of the transport plane touched down in San Antonio. The sound should have been comforting, the soft thud of rubber meeting earth, the hum of engines winding down, but it was. It felt strange, foreign. She had left this place as one version of herself and returned as another. Her mother waited on the tarmac, wrapped in a light jacket despite the Texas heat. When she saw Maria being helped down the ramp, her hand flew to her mouth. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Carmen ran forward and caught her daughter in a careful embrace, the kind that was full of love but mindful of wounds. "Welcome home, Mija," she whispered. "You made it." "I did," Maria said softly, "but I left some pieces behind." Her father was there too, standing a few steps back, his posture straight, his eyes glassy. He didn't speak much, he didn't need to. When he finally reached her, he just placed his calloused hand against her cheek and nodded once, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. The first weeks in Texas felt like learning how to exist again. The noise of the city, the color of the sky, even the softness of her bed, it all felt too gentle, too easy after everything she'd endured. The war had changed the rhythm of her heart. Peace felt like an unfamiliar song. Her therapy continued at the Military Rehabilitation Center in San Antonio. The air there smelled of determination, antiseptic and sweat, metal and hope. Rows of veterans filled the gym, each carrying their own invisible weight. Some were missing limbs, others walked with braces, some just sat in silence, staring through the walls. Maria quickly learned that survival was a language they all spoke, quiet, raw, and honest. Jake Martinez, now her stateside physical therapist, greeted her with the same easy grin. "Back at it, Rodriguez. You ready to move mountains today?" She smirked weakly. "Can we start with stairs first?" The exercises were brutal. The heat in Texas was unforgiving, and her shoulders screamed with every lift. The doctors had warned her that full mobility might never return, but she didn't believe in never anymore. One afternoon, after an especially difficult session, Jake handed her a towel. "You've got the kind of grit most people only pretend to have," he said. Maria wiped the sweat from her face. "It's not grit, it's stubbornness." "Whatever it is, don't lose it," he said. Days blurred into weeks, and the mirror became her scoreboard, not of beauty but of strength. Every scar told a story. Every muscle regained was a small victory. Her right arm, once unresponsive, now moved with effort but purpose. She would never climb again, but she could hold a cup of coffee, type, and write. And every time she lifted her arm higher, she thought of those 14 bullets and whispered to herself, "You didn't win. Pause. But you didn't lose either." Therapy wasn't just physical. Twice a week, she met with Dr. Shaw via video call. The sessions became less about reliving the firefight and more about what came next. "I keep thinking about meaning," Maria said once. "Like, maybe I lived because I'm supposed to do something, but what if I never figure out what that is?" Dr. Shaw smiled gently through the screen. "Meaning doesn't arrive fully formed, Maria. You build it, brick by brick, day by day." "Building takes time," Maria said. "So does healing," Dr. Shaw replied. "You're doing both." Her family was her foundation. Her mother took a leave from work to help her through recovery, cooking homemade meals that filled the house with warmth. Her father converted the garage into a therapy space, complete with resistance bands, mats, and a punching bag that hung unused for weeks. Carlos, her brother, became her shadow, driving her to appointments, teasing her gently when she grew frustrated. "You know," he said once, "you're kind of like a cyborg now." Maria rolled her eyes. "Why, because of the metal rods in my leg." He grinned. "No, because you refuse to shut down." For the first time in months, she laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep and alive. But there were still nights when the dreams returned. Sometimes she woke up sweating, certain she was back in Fallujah. Other times she saw faces: Patterson, Captain Johnson, the boy. The worst nights were the quiet ones when she heard nothing at all, just silence. That silence terrified her most. One evening, she sat on the porch watching the sunset melt across the sky when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello. Maria Rodriguez." The voice was low, familiar. "Commander Morrison." "Commander," she said, her tone instinctively respectful. "Just Jake, please. I'm off duty for once," he said, and she could almost hear the hint of a smile. "I wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" She hesitated, getting there, learning how to be normal again. "There's no going back to normal," he said. "There's only forward." His words hung between them, simple, true, heavy. They spoke for a while about the SEALs, about the mission's aftermath, about recovery. But then his voice softened. "You know, most people would have stopped at surviving. You're rebuilding. That's rare." "I don't really have a choice," she said quietly. "You always have a choice," Morrison replied. "That's what makes it brave." When the call ended, Maria sat in silence, watching the stars blink into the Texas sky. She realized that, for the first time, she wasn't thinking about the attack, she was thinking about the future. 6 months passed. Her body continued to mend. The nightmares came less often. Her therapist began to talk about discharge, about moving on. But Maria didn't just want to move on. She wanted to move towards something. During one of her sessions with Dr. Shaw, she confessed, "I can't stop thinking about helping others, people like me. The ones who come back but never really come home." Dr. Shaw's eyes lit up. "That's how it starts. You take your pain and turn it into purpose." "Maybe I could study counseling," Maria said, uncertain. "Psychology, trauma therapy, something that gives what you gave me." Dr. Shaw smiled. "I think that's exactly what you're meant to do." And so she did. Maria applied for a master's program in counseling psychology, using her GI Bill benefits to cover tuition. Her acceptance letter arrived on a quiet morning in late spring. Her mother cried. Her father smiled the way only a proud man can, silently, with tears he pretended weren't there. Her first day back on campus was surreal. She moved slower than the others, careful of her leg, her shoulders still stiff under her shirt. But she carried something most of them didn't: perspective. When professors spoke about trauma, she didn't just listen, she remembered. When they talked about empathy, she thought of Patterson, kneeling beside her in the dust. When they spoke of resilience, she thought of every step she'd taken with Jake Martinez at her side. The classroom became her new battlefield, one where the fight wasn't to survive, but to understand. Weeks into the semester, Commander Morrison called again. This time his tone was lighter. "Got a proposition for you," he said. "My unit, starting a new program to train translators for overseas deployment. We need someone with real-world experience, someone who's lived it. You'd be perfect." Maria laughed softly. "I thought you said there's no going back." "I didn't say you couldn't use what you learned," Morrison replied. "You wouldn't be on the front lines. You'd be preparing others, teaching them how to see what most people miss, how to survive." She hesitated. "I'll think about it." "Take your time," he said. "Just don't underestimate what your story can do for others." That night she sat at her desk, the acceptance letter to her counseling program beside Morrison's message. For the first time, she saw how both paths could coexist, healing herself while helping others do the same. She ran her fingers over the faint scars on her arm. The skin was smooth now, the pain dulled, but the memory lived beneath it. In the reflection of the window, she saw a woman transformed not by war, but by what came after. A woman who had been broken and rebuilt, who had turned wounds into wisdom. Outside, the cicadas sang in the warm Texas night, the sound steady and rhythmic, a heartbeat echoing through the trees. And Maria whispered to herself, "Maybe home isn't a place you return to. Maybe it's what you rebuild inside you." What does strength look like when no one's watching? For Maria, it looked like showing up, even on the days when her scars ached, when the dreams clawed at the edge of sleep, when her body whispered enough and her heart whispered not yet. Her mornings began before sunrise now. The Texas air was cool still, the world quiet enough for her to think. She'd walk slowly down the street with her cane, every step steady, deliberate. The horizon would turn gold, and with it, she'd feel that quiet pulse of life she once thought she'd lost. She'd whisper to herself, "You're still here, keep going." It had been 2 years since Fallujah. The counseling program had given her structure, books, classes, the language to describe what she'd felt but never named. Words like moral injury, vicarious trauma, post-traumatic growth. They weren't just academic concepts, they were mirrors. Each lecture, each discussion brought her closer to understanding her own reflection. But what truly changed her wasn't theory, it was people. Her internship at the Veterans Rehabilitation Center was where everything came together. She remembered walking through those wide white halls for the first time, the smell of antiseptic mixing with coffee and sweat, the soft shuffle of prosthetic limbs against tile. The sounds were familiar, hauntingly so. Dr. Shaw had written her a recommendation herself. "You'll fit right in," she'd said. "They need someone who's lived what they're afraid to speak." Maria quickly realized therapy wasn't about having all the answers. It was about presence, listening, silence. She became the kind of counselor she once needed, not someone who asked, "How do you feel?" but someone who sat with the unspoken until it found its way out. One afternoon, a young Marine named Daniel was assigned to her group. 19 years old, fresh out of surgery, missing half his right leg. He didn't talk much. Most days he sat with his hood up, staring at the floor, answering questions with shrugs. When she asked him how he was holding up, he muttered, "Fine." The same fine she used to give Dr. Shaw. So she didn't push. Instead, she started sitting beside him during sessions, saying little, letting silence do its work. Weeks passed. One day she found him staring at her arm, where the scars peeked out from her sleeve. "How bad was it?" he asked quietly. Maria looked at him surprised. "Fallujah, 14 bullets." He whistled low. "You win." She smiled faintly. "No one wins in this game, Daniel. You just make peace with the rules." He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wish I'd died out there," he whispered. Maria took a slow breath. "I used to think that too." "What changed?" he asked, not looking at her. "I realized death isn't the only way to lose yourself," she said softly. "Sometimes living, really living, is the hardest kind of fight." That was the first time he met her eyes. From then on, Daniel started talking, not much, not fast, but enough. Stories about his squad, the things he saw, the things he couldn't forget. She didn't interrupt, didn't correct, just listened. That was her secret weapon, silence with purpose. Weeks turned into months, and her small group began to grow stronger together, 6 veterans, each carrying invisible weight. Maria guided them through it with quiet steadiness, mixing empathy with grit. There were setbacks. One soldier relapsed into alcohol. Another stopped showing up for sessions. The kind of losses that could crush a therapist early in their work. But Maria had learned that healing isn't linear. It's messy, unpredictable, human. She found her own healing in helping them find theirs. After one particularly rough day, she sat alone in her car, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The face that looked back wasn't fragile anymore. Older, sure. Wiser, maybe. But unbreakable in ways she couldn't have imagined before. Her phone buzzed. Commander Morrison again. "Rodriguez," his familiar voice came through. "How life treating you?" Maria chuckled. "You mean how life after being shot 14 times? Not bad, sir, still upright." He laughed softly. "I heard about the Veterans Center. Word spreading. They say you've got a gift." "I just listen," she said. "That's rarer than you think," he replied. "You'd be surprised how many people talk without hearing." He paused, then added, "We've got a new rotation of SEAL candidates doing pre-deployment prep next month. Would you come give a talk? About resilience, field trauma, the human side of survival. It might mean something coming from someone who's lived it." Maria hesitated. "Public speaking is exactly my comfort zone." "Neither is getting shot," Morrison said dryly. "You handled that fine." She laughed. "Point taken, I'll think about it." After the call, she sat in silence. The idea terrified her, standing in front of elite soldiers, telling her story aloud. But another voice inside her whispered, "You've carried this long enough. Maybe it's time to share it." 2 weeks later, she stood on stage at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. The room was packed, rows of recruits, instructors, medics. Morrison stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes steady. Maria took a breath and began. "I used to think strength meant never breaking," she said. "But I learned that real strength is what happens after you do." She told them about Fallujah, the heat, the noise, the blood. The moment she thought it was over, the boy in the street, the silence that followed. But she didn't dwell on the pain. She spoke about the people who saved her, Patterson, Dr. Mitchell, Morrison's team. About the years of recovery, the therapy, the nights she questioned whether her life still mattered. And then, about the moment she realized that survival is just another word for unfinished purpose. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. When she finished, there was no applause at first, just a quiet stillness, the kind that only comes when words reach the bone. Then one by one, soldiers stood, not out of formality but respect. Morrison met her eyes and nodded. She nodded back. No words needed. Later, as she walked through the corridors, one young SEAL trainee caught up to her. "Ma'am," he said awkwardly, "I just wanted to say thank you for saying what the rest of us don't know how to." Maria smiled. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing: when it's dark, remember that there's light on the other side. Always." He nodded, eyes glistening. That night back home, Maria sat outside under the Texas sky, the stars endless above her. The same stars she'd stared at through a hospital window once, wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. Now she did, not perfectly, not entirely, but enough. Carlos came outside, handing her a mug of coffee. "You were on the news today," he said with a grin. "Guess you're officially famous." Maria laughed. "Great, now I can't even buy groceries in peace." He smiled. "Seriously though, you did something incredible." She looked at him, her expression soft. "I didn't do it alone." They sat in silence, the night air warm around them. Finally Maria whispered, "You know, sometimes I think about the bullets. 14 chances to die, but each one missed something vital. Maybe that's not luck, maybe that's purpose." Carlos tilted his head. "You think everything happens for a reason." She thought for a long moment. "No, I think everything happens for a lesson." He nodded slowly. "That sounds like you." Maria smiled faintly, eyes drifting toward the horizon. The war had taken much blood, sleep, innocence, but it had also given her something rare: clarity. The understanding that life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about finding meaning in spite of it. And as the first light of dawn brushed the sky, she whispered to herself, "This is what surviving looks like." What would you say to the place that almost killed you? Maria had asked herself that question 1,000 times. For years, she'd avoided the answer. Some wounds don't need revisiting, but closure isn't something you find, it's something you build. So when the email came from the International Aid Organization, inviting her to join a trauma counseling mission in Iraq, she hesitated for days before replying. Her hand trembled as she typed a single word: yes. It had been nearly 5 years since Fallujah, 5 years since blood and dust and gunfire, 5 years since 14 bullets tried and failed to silence her. Now she returned not as a soldier or a survivor, but as a healer. The flight from Texas to Baghdad felt both endless and instant. Every sound, the engine hum, the cabin announcements, the metallic click of seat belts carried echoes. But the fear that once haunted her felt distant now, softened by purpose. When the plane landed, the heat hit her like an old memory. The air smelled of dust, fuel, and the faint sweetness of cardamom tea, the scent of a country that had never stopped rebuilding itself. Her boots touched the ground, and something in her chest eased. At the aid camp, she met with local counselors, Iraqi men and women who worked with civilians still scarred by war. Some were former interpreters, others teachers, doctors, or social workers. All carried stories in their eyes. The lead coordinator, a woman named Layla, greeted her warmly. "You've come a long way, Maria." Maria smiled. "So have you." The days were long but meaningful. She taught workshops on trauma, empathy, and silent strength. She listened to stories, hundreds of them: mothers who lost sons, children who feared thunder because it sounded like bombs, soldiers who still dreamed in gunfire. Through it all, Maria found herself listening with new ears, not as a victim, not as a savior, but as someone who finally understood what healing really meant. It wasn't about erasing pain. It was about giving it a voice, then letting it rest. One afternoon, while walking through the market outside the camp, she stopped short. The street was narrow, alive with color, fabric stalls, the smell of bread baking, the rhythm of vendors shouting prices. For a moment her breath caught. The sunlight hit the cracked walls just so, and in that instant it looked exactly like that street, the one in Fallujah. Her heart began to race. The sound of a cart dropping a metal pan sent her flinching backward. She could almost hear it again, the scream of bullets, the roar of chaos, the heat, the blood. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. A voice broke through the noise, a young boy calling out in Arabic, selling pomegranates from a wooden crate. His laughter echoed through the market, clear and innocent. When she opened her eyes, the illusion faded. The war was gone. Life had replaced it. She walked to the boy and bought a pomegranate. He handed it to her, smiling shyly. "Shukran," she said, "thank you." He grinned. "You speak Arabic." "A little," she said softly, "enough to remember." As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in a shop window, a woman standing where she once fell, scars hidden beneath her sleeve, eyes steady and calm. The sight filled her with something she hadn't felt in years: peace. That night under the desert stars, she found herself sitting alone outside the camp. The horizon glowed faintly from the distant city lights. The same land that had once stolen so much from her now seemed to whisper something back: "You made it home." Footsteps approached. Layla sat beside her, 2 cups of tea in hand. "You went to the market," she said knowingly. Maria smiled faintly. "You heard." "Small town, everyone hears everything," Layla said with a chuckle, then her tone softened. "Was it hard?" Maria stared into her tea. "Harder than I thought, easier than it used to be." Layla nodded. "That's healing. It never disappears, but it stops defining you." They sat in silence for a long time, the wind soft across the sand. Later that night, Maria walked back to her tent and opened her journal, the one she'd started during therapy in San Antonio. Inside were years of notes, memories, sketches, and reflections. On the first page, she'd once written in trembling handwriting, "Why did I survive?" She crossed it out. Below it she wrote, "Because someone had to show that you can." The next morning, the camp received a visit from a U.S. delegation, part of a joint mission to coordinate veteran and civilian trauma programs. And with them came a familiar face. Commander Jake Morrison, a little older now, a few more lines on his face but the same steady presence. When he saw her, he broke into a rare smile. "Rodriguez, I should have known you'd end up back here." She laughed. "Guess I can't stay away from deserts." "Still standing?" he asked. "Still standing," she said proudly. They walked through the camp together, talking about the old days, about Patterson, Dr. Mitchell, and others who had gone on to build new lives. "You did it, Maria," Morrison said quietly. "You turned pain into something useful. Not many can." "I had good teachers," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "We didn't save you that day, you know. You saved yourself. We just carried you the last few feet." She smiled softly. "Maybe we saved each other." They parted that evening under a fading orange sky. Morrison boarded his convoy back to Baghdad. Maria stayed behind, watching the desert stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Before turning back, she whispered a quiet goodbye, not to a person, but to a place, a memory, a version of herself she no longer needed to carry. The next day, she visited a small school built on the outskirts of the city, a place funded partly by veterans groups, partly by local families. The walls were painted bright blue. The sound of children's laughter filled the air. She sat with a group of young girls learning English. One of them asked, "Miss Maria, were you ever scared?" Maria smiled. "Every day." The girl frowned. "But you're brave." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Maria said softly. "It means you do what's right even when you are." The girl nodded slowly, repeating the words as if memorizing them. As Maria watched her, something inside clicked into place. Every bullet, every scar, every night she'd fought to breathe, it had all led here. To this. To teaching a child that fear and courage could live in the same heart. That night back at camp, she sat writing by lantern light. Her words came slowly, deliberately, like prayer. I used to think strength was about how much you could endure. Now I know it's about how gently you can live after you've endured. The war didn't take everything from me. It left me with purpose and the understanding that dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. She closed the notebook, smiled, and let the lantern's glow fade into the soft desert dark. The next morning, as the sun rose over Fallujah, she stood at the edge of the camp and looked out toward the horizon. The city shimmered in the heat, a mosaic of broken buildings and reborn life. She whispered, "I forgive you." And for the first time she meant it. Then she turned, lifted her pack and walked toward the convoy, not away from her past but forward, into the life she had rebuilt from it. The desert wind rose behind her, swirling dust around her boots, carrying her whisper into the air, the sound of peace earned, not given. Because some wars don't end with surrender. They end when the wounded choose to stand again. And in that choice lies the quietest kind of victory.